One thing that's commonly implemented in conjunction with dynamic DNS is aging and scavenging of resource records. And again, this is something you may want to implement if you're using dynamic DNS. The purpose of aging and scavenging is to set a timestamp on resource records, and that way if resource records are there that shouldn't be there, then they are eventually removed from the zone information. The best example of this is if a computer boots up, it registers its host record, its A record, and then later it's improperly disconnected from the network. It says someone just kills the power, or it freezes, or something like that. During a normal shutdown process, that resource record, there's a dynamic update to remove that resource record when the computer is shut down. However, if that is not the case, then you may have the situation where there are lots of records in the DNS information that should not be there. So they can take up server disk space, they can cause long transfers of zone information, because if it's in there, it's going to get transferred to secondary servers and to other Active Directory servers if it's Active Directory integrated, and it can degrade performance and responsiveness, and it can lead to incorrect name resolutions. To mitigate this, there is aging and scavenging. This must be enabled at both the server and the zone level, and you turn it on really at the server level, and then you enable it on a per zone level. It only affects primary zones, and again, if that should make sense if you keep in mind what the purpose of the primary zone is. The secondary zone would just get its copy of information, so no changes would be made at the secondary zone level. And if you manually configure, if you manually add, which you can do, just because it's dynamic doesn't mean you're prevented from adding manual records. If you add a manual record to the DNS zone information, then the timestamp on that record is set to 0, and therefore it's ignored when aging and scavenging. Now let's look at how to turn this thing on here. First of all, from the context menu of the server, here's how we do it at the server level. We will set aging and scavenging for all zones. It brings up this server aging scavenging properties, and you simply turn it on really with a click of the mouse here. Now you have two parameters here which under most circumstances you leave alone. The no refresh interval and the refresh interval. This is the time between the most recent refresh and the moment when the timestamp may be refreshed again. This is the time between when a record timestamp can be refreshed and the earliest moment when it can be scavenged. This has to be longer than that. This really allows scavenging to occur after this no refresh interval has expired. So first of all, you turn it on at the server level. Then this can also be applied once you click on OK to existing Active Directory integrated zones. You can say OK, and you can turn it on or not, but again, we're just turning it on at the server level. Now, on a per zone basis, you look at the properties of your zone by right-click and choosing properties. And by the way, something that also is worth mentioning here, sometimes to get the context menu, you have to make sure and do a left-click first. It's not always the case, but this can be a little wonky. There, for example, like I right-clicked on primary and we don't have the context menu we should, so to get it you have to select it with the left click, but just something worth throwing out there. At any rate, we're on scavenging and aging. Right-click, choose properties, and I'd already brought this up apparently. Zone aging and scavenging. This is done from the General tab. To set aging, scavenging properties, click aging, and that brings up this dialog box, which I had been taking a look at earlier, and then you turn it on the zone level, and then again you can tweak the parameters, but most of the time you won't. Now the reason why these are set the way they are is that, for example, in the no refresh interval, it decreases the number of write operations to the zone information, and this is also set where it is, and it should not really be moved up too high, because then the benefits of scavenging will be lost. But this no refresh interval is the time between the record was last refreshed and its timestamp set, and the time when the record becomes eligible to be refreshed. Well, when can a record be refreshed? Good question. Clients refresh either when the computer is restarted or while the computer is running, and when this actually occurs is dependent on the operating system. For example, every 24 hours for XP clients, or the resource record can be refreshed by other network services like DHCP, for example. Remember from the previous chapter, if we have clients that are using operating systems besides XP and 2000 Pro, then DHCP can sometimes update resource records. Now, once this is turned on, the defaults are that the scavenging will occur, in this case for the beanlink.org zone file, every 7 days by default. But you can also manually scavenge your records by right-clicking on the server and scavenge stale resource records. This looks through all the zones that have resource record scavenging enabled and performs a manual scavenge. So this is how it's done. Again, this is something that is quite helpful when you are working in a dynamic DNS environment, and in most networks that indeed will be the case.